The rain in Los Angeles is different from rain in other places. When it falls, the entire city seems to pause. It was a Tuesday evening, and the sky was a deep, bruised purple, heavy with clouds that had been threatening to burst all day. The streets were slick, reflecting the red and green glow of traffic lights in long, blurry streaks. It was the kind of night where people rushed to their cars, heads down, desperate to get home to the warmth of their living rooms and the comfort of their televisions. But not everyone was rushing. A solitary figure walked down the sidewalk, stepping over a puddle that had gathered near the curb. He moved with a slow, easy rhythm, unbothered by the drizzle that misted his dark hair. He wore a heavy jacket, wore at the elbows, and dark jeans that had seen better days. His boots splashed softly against the wet pavement. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another tired soul at the end of a long workday. But if they looked closer, really looked, they would recognize the face. It was a face that had graced billboards and movie screens for decades. It was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't hiding, not exactly. He never really hid. He just had a way of blending in, of making himself small in a city that was obsessed with being big. He didn't have an entourage. There were no bodyguards in dark suits flanking him. There was just him, his thoughts, and the rain. Keanu stopped in front of a small diner. The sign above the door buzzed with a soft, electric hum, the neon letters reflecting in the wet glass of the window. It wasn't a fancy place. It wasn't a spot where the rich and famous went to be seen. It was a place for coffee, burgers, and silence. That was exactly what he needed. He pushed the door open. A small bell attached to the top frame gave a cheerful jingle, cutting to the low hum of the rain outside. The air inside smelled of fresh coffee, bacon grease, and old leather. It was a warm, heavy smell that instantly made a person feel like they were safe. It felt like home, even if you didn't have one. Keanu stood just inside the entrance for a moment, brushing the water from his shoulders. The diner was mostly empty. There was an older couple sitting by the window, sharing a slice of pie. A truck driver sat at the counter, nursing a mug of black coffee while reading a folded newspaper. In the back corner, a young person sat with a laptop, the blue light from the screen illuminating their tired face. Nobody looked up. The bell had rung, but the people here were used to strangers. In a city like this, everyone was a stranger. He made his way to a booth in the back. It was the same spot he usually picked when he came here, though he doubted anyone noticed the pattern. He liked this booth because it faced the door. It was a habit maybe from movies, or maybe just a natural instinct to see who was coming and going. He slid onto the red vinyl seat, which sighed under his weight. The table had a small crack in the formica top, covered by a thin paper placemat. Keanu picked up the menu. He didn't really need to read it. He knew the laminated pages by heart. The pictures of pancakes, the list of sandwiches, the daily specials written in marker. But he liked the act of looking at it. It felt normal. It felt regular. In a life that was often anything but normal, these small rituals were the things that kept him grounded. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the glass like 1,000 tiny fingers. Keanu watched the droplets slide down the window for a moment. He felt a familiar heaviness in his chest. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was just the weight of the day. He had spent hours on a set, repeating lines, hitting marks, pretending to be someone else. The noise of production, the lights, the chaos, it had a way of draining a person. He loved his job. He truly did, but the silence afterward was necessary. It was the only way to find himself again. He sighed, a quiet sound that was lost in the general murmur of the diner. He placed the menu back on the table, his decision made. A club sandwich. It was simple, reliable food. You didn't have to think too hard about a club sandwich. You just ate it. He looked around the room again. The couple by the window was laughing quietly at something the man had said. The truck driver turned a page of his newspaper. The young person in the corner typed furiously, lost in their own world. It was a snapshot of ordinary life. Keanu envied it sometimes. He envied the ability to just be, without the weight of expectation hanging over his head. He remembered a time, years ago, when he would walk into a room and feel the energy shift. People would whisper. They would point. It used to make him feel exposed, like an animal in a zoo. Over time, he had learned to build a wall around himself. Not a wall of arrogance, but a wall of quiet humility. He had learned to smile and nod, to sign the autographs, to take the photos. But inside, he was protecting the part of himself that just wanted to sit in a diner and eat a sandwich without being a spectacle. Tonight, though, felt different. The air in the diner felt charged with a strange kind of static. He couldn't explain it. He shifted in his seat, trying to get comfortable. He reached for a napkin from the dispenser and wiped a small droplet of water from the table. He was ready to order. He was ready for the comfort of food and the solitude of his booth. He had no idea that the simple act of walking through that door had set a different kind of plan in motion. At that moment, a figure emerged from the kitchen, carrying a pot of coffee. It was the waitress. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a uniform that was a little too big for her small frame. She had a pad of paper tucked into her apron pocket and a tired but genuine smile on her face. She hadn't noticed Keanu yet. She was busy topping off the truck driver's mug, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Keanu watched her for a second. He saw the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. He saw the way she laughed at something the truck driver said. She looked tired, too. It was late, and she probably wanted to go home just as much as everyone else. He turned his gaze back to the table, tracing the pattern on the placemat with his finger. He was just a man waiting for his dinner. He was hungry, he was wet, and he was looking forward to a hot meal. But as the waitress finished at the counter and turned toward the back of the room, her eyes landed on his booth. She stopped for a fraction of a second. The night had been long, and the hours had dragged on, but in that split second, the atmosphere in the diner shifted, though Keanu didn't know it yet. He was about to order a meal, but he was going to get much more than he bargained for. He looked up, his face calm and open, ready to speak, ready to ask for nothing more than a sandwich and a coffee. The stage was set, and the rain kept falling outside, washing the city clean, while inside, a small moment was about to turn into something unforgettable. The young waitress stood near the counter, her hand resting on the edge of the coffee pot. She had been doing this job for 2 years now, long enough to know the rhythm of a Tuesday night. Usually it was just the regulars, the truck driver, the couple who shared pie, the lonely souls looking for a warm cup to hold on to. But tonight, the rhythm had shifted. The silence in the diner felt different, charged with a strange, quiet energy. She looked toward the back booth. She knew who he was. Of course, she did. It was impossible to live in the city and not recognize that face. It wasn't just the movies, though she had seen plenty of them. It was a face that seemed to be everywhere on the internet, usually attached to stories about him giving up his seat on the subway or buying a motorbike for a stunt crew member. But seeing a picture on a phone screen was entirely different from seeing the real person sitting 10 feet away. He looked smaller in person, not in a bad way, just more real. He didn't look like an action hero or a world-famous star. He looked like a man who had spent a long day carrying heavy things. He was still holding the menu, but his eyes were staring at the rain sliding down the window. He looked solitary. It was a specific kind of solitude, the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who want pieces of you all day long. She took a deep breath. There was a rule in this diner, unwritten but understood by everyone who worked there. Respect the customer, especially the famous ones. They came here because they didn't want to be fussed over. They wanted to be invisible for an hour. She smoothed the front of her apron, grabbed her notepad, and started walking toward him. Her sneakers squeaked slightly on the linoleum floor, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. As she got closer, she noticed the details. She saw the way his jacket was soaked at the shoulders. She saw the scruff on his face, gray and dark, showing the passing of time. She saw his hands resting on the table. They were rough hands, scarred and strong, resting on either side of the laminated menu. He didn't look up until she was right next to the table. "Hi there," she said, her voice soft. She kept her tone even, friendly but not overly eager. She didn't want to be another person screaming for his attention. He looked up then, and she was struck by his eyes. They were dark and deep, holding a kindness that seemed to be waiting for a reason to come out. But there was a tiredness there, too. It was a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond just needing a nap. It was a look of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and kept moving anyway. "Hi," he replied. His voice was raspy and gentle. He closed the menu and slid it to the side. "I think I'm ready." "Whenever you are," she said, her pen poised over the paper. "I'll just have the club sandwich," he said. He paused for a second, looking at the empty coffee cup on the table. "And a black coffee, please. Hot." "Club sandwich and a black coffee," she repeated, writing it down even though she knew she wouldn't forget it. "Fries come with that." "That sounds perfect." She wrote the order and tucked the pen back into her apron. Usually, this was the moment she would turn around and walk away. The transaction was done. The order was placed. But she found her feet, rooted to the spot. There was something in the way he was sitting, slightly hunched, his shoulders curved inward, as if he were protecting himself from a cold wind that only he could feel. She knew his story. Everyone did. She knew about the tragedies that seemed to follow him like shadows. She knew he had lost the love of his life. She knew about the daughter he never got to watch grow up. She knew about his sister and her long battle with illness. The world often talked about Keanu the Saint or sad Keanu, turning his pain into internet jokes. But standing here, looking at the real man, there was nothing funny about it. It just felt incredibly heavy. She felt a sudden, sharp pang in her chest. It wasn't pity. Pity felt cheap, and she didn't think he needed that. It was empathy. She knew what it felt like to have a bad day, to feel invisible, to feel like the world was demanding more than you had to give. She imagined what it must be like to walk through life, with everyone knowing your name, but no one really knowing you. He was looking at her now, perhaps wondering why she was still standing there. He offered a polite, tight smile. It was the smile of a man who was used to being stared at, waiting for the request for a selfie or an autograph. He was bracing himself for the interruption. But she didn't ask for a picture. She didn't ask him to sign a napkin. She didn't tell him she loved his movies. She just gave a small nod and said, "I'll get that started for you right away." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, but her mind was racing. The kitchen window was a square of bright light in the dim diner. She clipped the order ticket to the spinning wheel and watched the cook, a large man with a sweat-stained bandana, grab it without looking up. "One club coming up," the cook mumbled, slapping bread onto grill. The waitress leaned against the stainless steel counter. She could see the dining room from here through the service window. She watched Keanu in the booth. He had turned back to the window, watching the rain again. He looked so lonely. It struck her that he was probably one of the most recognized people on the planet. Yet he was eating dinner alone in a run-down diner on a Tuesday night. It didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair that someone who brought so much entertainment to the world, someone who was notoriously kind to fans and strangers alike, should sit in silence. She thought about the coffee she was about to pour. She thought about the sandwich. It was just food. It was fuel. It didn't mean anything. She found herself thinking about the note she kept in her apron pocket. It was just a scrap of paper, the back of an old receipt. She often used it to write down things she needed to remember: milk, bread, a phone number. Her fingers brushed against it. She looked at him again. He ran a hand through his damp hair, sighing. He looked like he was carrying the weight of the world, and no one was offering to help him hold it. A thought struck her. It was a crazy thought, maybe even a little unprofessional. She couldn't fix his life. She couldn't bring back the people he had lost. She couldn't erase the tiredness from his bones. But she could see him. She could let him know that he wasn't just a ghost in a booth. She could offer a tiny spark of human connection that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with soul. The coffee machine beeped, signaling that a fresh pot was ready. The sound snapped her back to reality. She grabbed a glass pot, the heat seeping through her glove. She reached for a clean, white mug from the stack. "Order up in 5, the cook grunted. "Thanks," she whispered. She poured the coffee, the dark liquid swirling into the cup. The steam rose up, fogging her vision for a second. She stood there, holding the pot, staring at the booth in the corner. The hesitation was gone now. She knew what she had to do. It wasn't about being a fan anymore. It was about being a human being. She placed the coffee pot back on the warmer. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small scrap of paper. She smoothed it out on the counter. She didn't have a pen in her hand, but she knew she had one in her apron. She stood there for a heartbeat, listening to the rain hit the diner roof. She wasn't just going to serve him a sandwich. She was going to give him something he didn't know he needed. And maybe, just maybe, it would make the night a little less dark for him. She took a deep breath, grabbed the pen, and clicked it open. It was time to write something real. The kitchen was loud with the sizzle of the grill and the clatter of metal spatulas. But for the young waitress, the world had gone quiet. She stood at the service station, staring down at the small piece of paper in her hand. It was just a torn corner of an order slip, the edges rough and uneven. In the grand scheme of things, it was nothing. It was trash. But in this moment, it felt like the heaviest thing she had ever held. She clicked her pen. The tip came out, hovering over the white space. Doubt crept in, cold and insistent. What was she doing? He was a celebrity. He was a millionaire. He probably had people telling him how great he was every single day. Who was she to offer him advice? She was just a girl working a night shift in the diner. Tired feet, empty bank account, just trying to pay rent. He lived in a world of private jets and red carpets. What could she possibly say that would matter to a man like that? She looked up through the service window. From here, she could see the back of his head. He was still staring out the window, his posture slumped. It struck her again, that profound sense of isolation. It didn't look like the life of a movie star. It looked like the life of a man who had been walking a long, hard road alone. She realized then that money and fame don't build walls against sadness. If anything, they probably build cages. The doubt evaporated. She wasn't writing to a celebrity. She was writing to the human being sitting in booth 4. She leaned against the counter and started to write. She didn't think too hard about the words. She let them come from that place inside her that knew what it felt like to be lonely. She wrote slowly, trying to make her handwriting neat. You bring so much light to the screen, but don't forget to save some for yourself. She stopped and read it back. It sounded okay. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't a famous quote. It was just a simple truth. She added the next line, the one that felt most important. You are not alone. She underlined the word not. Then, feeling a little silly but wanting to add a touch of softness to the stark black ink, she drew a small smiley face at the bottom. The circle was a bit lopsided, and the eyes were different sizes, but it had a certain charm to it. It looked imperfect, just like the rest of the world. She folded the paper twice, making a small square. She tucked it into the pocket of her apron. Her heart was hammering against her ribs now, a strange, nervous rhythm. She felt like she was about to step onto a stage or jump into deep water. Order up, the cook called out, sliding the white plate onto the metal shelf. The sound made her jump. The club sandwich looked perfect. Turkey, bacon, lettuce, tomato, stacked high and cut into triangles. A small pile of fries sat next to it, steaming. Thanks, Charlie, she said to the cook, though he had already turned back to his grill. She took a deep breath, grabbed the plate, and poured a fresh cup of black coffee into a mug. Balancing the plate on her left arm and holding the coffee in her right hand, she turned back toward the dining room. The walk to the booth felt longer than usual. The floorboard seemed to creak louder under her sneakers. The hum of the refrigerator and the tap of the rain on the glass filled her ears. She focused on the back of his jacket. She focused on not spilling the coffee. She focused on breathing. As she approached, he must have heard her footsteps. He turned his head, breaking his gaze from the rainy window. His face was neutral, polite, ready to receive his food. He smiled a small, practiced smile. It was the kind of smile that thanked you for doing your job, but kept you at a distance. She set the coffee down first. The ceramic clinked softly against the table. Then she placed a plate of food in front of him, the smell of the warm bread wafting up between them. Club sandwich and black coffee, she said softly. Her voice sounded steady, which surprised her. Can I get you anything else right now? He shook his head slightly, reaching for a napkin. No, this is perfect. Thank you. This was the moment. The transaction was over. She should have turned and walked away. That was the script. That was the rule. But she didn't turn. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed the rough edges of the folded paper. She pulled it out and placed it gently on the table, right next to his fork. She didn't slide it to him. She didn't make a big show of it. She just placed it there like it was a receipt or a flyer. He looked down at the folded white square, then back up at her. Confusion flickered in his dark eyes. He wasn't used to surprises. He wasn't used to waitresses leaving him notes. He opened his mouth as if to ask a question, but she didn't give him the chance. "I thought you might need that," she whispered. She held his gaze for 1 second, just long enough to show him that she meant it. She didn't look at him with starstruck eyes. She didn't look at him with pity. She looked at him with kindness, pure and simple. Then, before he could respond, before he could say anything that might break the spell, she turned around. She walked away quickly, her sneakers squeaking on the floor, her heart racing in her chest. She didn't go back to the kitchen immediately. She went to the far end of the counter, near the pie display, and began wiping down a spot that was already clean. She watched from the corner of her eye. She saw him sitting there, the sandwich untouched in front of him. He wasn't eating. He was looking at the note. He picked it up. His fingers, rough and scarred, held a small piece of paper with a strange delicacy. He unfolded it. She watched his face. She saw the way his brow furrowed slightly as he read the first line. She saw the way his head tilted as he read the second. The diner was quiet, the rain drumming a steady beat on the roof. In that stillness, she watched a change come over him. The mask of the celebrity, the armor of the action star, seemed to dissolve. He wasn't an actor anymore. He was just a man reading a kind word on a rainy Tuesday night. He sat there, holding the note, reading it over and over again. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't look out the window. He just looked at the words. The young waitress wiped the counter. Her breath held tight in her chest. She had done it. She had crossed the line between server and human being. And as she watched him trace the lopsided smiley face with his thumb, she knew, somehow, that she had done the right thing. The note sat in his palm, lighter than a feather but heavier than a stone. Keanu stared at the handwriting. It was messy and hurried, the ink bleeding slightly into the cheap paper. It wasn't a receipt. It wasn't a bill. It was a message. He unfolded the last fold, smoothing the paper out against the table. He read the words again, slowly this time. Asterisk, you bring so much light to the screen, but don't forget to save some for yourself. You are not alone. Asterisk. He stopped breathing for a second. The words hung in the air, suspended in the smell of bacon and coffee. It wasn't the content of the message that struck him so hard. People said nice things to him all the time. They told him he was great. They told him they loved his movies. They told him he was a good person. But those words usually came with a catch. They came with a camera phone or a request or a desperate need for him to be someone they wanted him to be. This was different. This note had no catch. There was no camera watching. There was no audience. It was just a simple, pure act of kindness from a stranger who owed him nothing. He looked at the little smiley face drawn at the bottom. It was crooked. The eyes were uneven. It was imperfect, and because of that, it was perfect. It reminded him of something a child might draw, or a friend might scribble on a napkin. It felt real. Keanu leaned back in the booth. The vinyl creaked under him. He looked out the window, but he wasn't seeing the rain anymore. He was seeing the last few years. He was seeing the long hours on set, the hotels that all looked the same, the airports, the interviews where he had to smile and pretend everything was okay. He thought about the silence in his house when he went home. He loved his life. He really did, but the weight of it sometimes pressed down on his chest until he felt like he couldn't breathe. He had spent so long bringing light to other people, entertaining them, making them feel something, that he sometimes forgot to check if his own light was still burning. He thought about the losses he had suffered, the people who were gone, the empty chairs at the dinner table. The world liked to talk about his tragic life on the internet, turning his pain into memes, but the reality of it was just quiet. It was a quiet ache that lived in his bones. Until this moment, he hadn't realized how hungry he was for someone to just see him, not the movie star, not the internet icon, just a man who was tired and eating a sandwich alone in the rain. He read the note one more time. Asterisk, you are not alone. Asterisk. A strange sensation washed over him. It started in his chest and spread to his fingertips. It felt like a warm cup of coffee on a freezing day. It felt like a hand reaching out in the dark. It was gratitude, deep and overwhelming. He looked up, scanning the diner for the waitress. He found her standing near the pie counter at the other end of the room. She was wiping down the glass surface, not looking at him. She was giving him space. She wasn't waiting for a reaction. She wasn't hoping for a tip or a story to tell her friends. She had done her good deed and stepped away. He watched her for a moment. She looked tired. She looked like she had been on her feet all day, but there was a grace to her, a quiet strength. She had taken a risk, writing that note. She had opened herself up to rejection. He could have just crumbled it up and thrown it away. He could have laughed, but she did it anyway. She took the chance. Keanu picked up his coffee cup. The warmth seeped into his hands. He took a sip, the bitter taste grounding him. The noise of the diner started to come back into focus. The low hum of the refrigerator, the clink of forks on plates, the rain against the glass. But the world didn't feel as gray as it had 10 minutes ago. The isolation hadn't vanished, but the edge had been taken off. He turned his attention to the sandwich. He picked up a triangle of the club. He took a bite. It tasted better than he expected. It tasted like normalcy. It tasted like life. He ate slowly, savoring the food. Usually he ate quickly, just fueling up before the next task. But tonight, he wanted to stay in this moment. He wanted to honor the gift he had been given. Every time he took a bite, he glanced at the note lying on the table next to his plate. It was a small white square, but it had changed the entire room. As he ate, he felt a shift inside him. The heaviness in his chest didn't disappear, but it felt lighter, easier to carry. He wasn't just sad Keanu or action star Keanu. He was a human being who had been touched by another human being. That connection, that spark, was more valuable than any award or box office record. He finished the sandwich and pushed the plate slightly away. He drank the last of his coffee. The cup was empty, but he didn't want to leave just yet. He wasn't ready to walk back out into the rain and the cold. He wanted to hold on to this feeling for a little longer. He thought about what to do next. He couldn't just leave money on the table and walk out. That would be the easy thing. That would be the transactional thing. But this night wasn't about transactions. It was about connection. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't look at the cash inside. He knew he would leave a good tip. That was second nature to him. But the money wasn't the point. He needed to say something. He needed to thank her. But what do you say to someone who gave you a piece of your soul back? He looked at the note again. He carefully folded it back up along the original creases. He didn't put it in his pocket. He placed it in the center of the table, propping it up against the salt shaker. He wanted her to know he had kept it. He wanted her to know it mattered. He stood up slowly. His legs were a little stiff from the booth. He buttoned his jacket. The rain was still falling outside, drumming against the glass, a steady gray curtain. But he didn't feel the dampness anymore. He felt warm. He walked toward the register. He didn't head for the door. He headed for the counter where the young waitress was standing. She looked up as he approached. She saw him coming, and he watched her eyes widen slightly. She looked nervous, maybe worried that she had overstepped, or maybe just surprised that he was coming to talk to her. Keanu didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to draw attention. He just wanted to bridge the gap between the booth and the counter. He stopped a few feet away from her, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. His face was serious, but his eyes were soft. They were smiling. He took a breath. He wanted to get the words right. He wanted to make sure she understood that a simple note on a scrap of paper had done something that no amount of money or fame could do. It had made him feel seen. The diner was still quiet. The truck driver had gone back to his paper. The couple was paying their bill. The world was moving on. But for Keanu, time had paused one last time. He stood there, looking at the young woman who had changed his night, ready to offer the only thing he truly had to give in that moment, a moment of genuine human gratitude. The waitress stood behind the counter, her hand resting idly on the pie display. She was trying to look busy, adjusting the plates of apple and cherry pies so they sat perfectly straight, but her attention was entirely focused on the man walking toward her. Her heart was doing a strange, fluttering rhythm in her chest, a mix of anxiety and hope. She had taken a risk with the note, a big one. In the service industry, you weren't supposed to get personal with the customers. You were supposed to be invisible, a ghost who refilled coffee and cleared plates. She had broken that rule. Now, As Keanu Reeves approached the register, she felt a sudden wave of vulnerability. She worried that she had crossed a line. Maybe he thought she was crazy. Maybe he thought she was just another fan trying to get his attention in a clever way. She tightened her hand on the rag in her apron pocket, waiting for the awkwardness to settle in. But when she looked into his eyes, the awkwardness vanished. He stopped right in front of the register, his hands loose at his sides. He didn't look like a celebrity preparing for a photo op. He looked like a neighbor who had come over to return a borrowed tool. He looked grounded, present. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her. The corners of his eyes crinkled slightly, a genuine warmth radiating from them that had nothing to do with Hollywood charm. It was a look of profound gratitude, the kind you give someone who has just handed you an umbrella in a storm. "Hi," he said again, his voice low and rough, just like it had been at the table. "Hi," she replied, her voice sounding a little breathless. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she couldn't stop. Did you enjoy the sandwich?" He nodded slowly. "It was perfect, exactly what I needed." He paused, his gaze dropping to the counter for a moment before lifting back to hers. "But I didn't come up here to talk about the sandwich." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a simple, worn leather bifold, bulging slightly with receipts and cards. He opened it and pulled out a few bills. He didn't look at the amount. He just placed them on the counter. "The note," he said softly. He tapped his chest, right over his heart. "I want you to know I'm keeping it." The waitress blinked. She felt a warmth spread through her cheeks, a blush she couldn't hide. "Oh," she stammered. It was just a piece of paper. I didn't want to bother you." "You didn't bother me," he said. His tone was firm but gentle. "You woke me up." He looked around the empty diner, then back at her. "You know, people see me all the time. They see the characters. They see the movies. But very few people actually look. They don't see the person standing right in front of them. Tonight, you saw me, and that means more than you know." The waitress felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long being the one who serves, the one who fades into the background. To be seen in return, to be acknowledged for a simple act of kindness, was overwhelming. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," Keanu said. He didn't say it casually. He said it with weight, like he was thanking her for saving his life, even if all she had really saved was his evening. "Don't stop doing what you do. The world needs more of it." He gave her one last small, private smile, the kind that feels like a secret share between friends, and turned toward the door. The waitress reached for the bills he had left on the counter. She expected a generous tip, maybe 20%, maybe even 50%. Keanu was known for being a good tipper, but when she looked down at the stack of cash, her breath hitched. He had left enough to cover the meal 3 times over. It wasn't an ostentatious amount, not a stack of hundreds meant to show off his wealth. It was just a genuine, heartfelt thank you. But the money wasn't what she would remember. It was the way he had looked at her. It was the fact that he had taken the time to come to the counter, to look her in the eye, and to validate her existence as a human being. Keanu pushed the door open. The bell above it jingled again, a bright, cheery sound that cut through the silence of the diner. The cold air from outside rushed in, mixing with the warm smell of coffee and bacon. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. The rain had slowed down. It was no longer a heavy downpour, but a soft, rhythmic drizzle. The streets were still wet, glistening under the streetlights like rivers of silver. He pulled his collar up, not because he was cold, but because it was habit. He stood on the curb for a moment, taking a deep breath of the wet, clean air. He reached into his jacket pocket and felt the small, folded square of paper there. It was dry and safe. He thought about the words written on it. "Save some for yourself." He looked up at the sky. The heavy purple clouds were breaking apart, revealing small patches of dark blue and even a distant star twinkling through the mist. He felt lighter. The crushing weight of the day, the exhaustion, the loneliness, it hadn't magically disappeared, but it no longer felt like he was carrying it alone. Someone had reached out. Someone had reminded him that he was part of the human race, not just a figure on a screen. He started walking down the street, his boots splashing gently in the puddles. He didn't look back at the diner. He didn't need to. The connection was made, and it was solid. It was a small moment in a big, chaotic world, but it was real. Inside the diner, the waitress watched his figure disappear into the mist. She looked down at the money in her hand, and then she looked at the empty booth where he had sat. The plate was still there, the napkin crumpled, but the note was gone. He had taken it with him. She walked over the booth to clear the table. She wiped down the table with her rag, scrubbing in circles. As she worked, she felt a smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph or excitement. It was a smile of peace. She realized that tonight, she hadn't just served a meal. She had served a moment of grace. The truck driver at the counter finished his coffee and left a dollar bill on the counter. "Night," he mumbled, heading for the door. "Good night," she called back. The diner was quiet again. The hum of the refrigerator returned. The sound of the rain tapping on the roof continued. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. For Keanu, the walk home wasn't a lonely trudge through the rain. It was a walk with purpose. He thought about the waitress, about her tired eyes and her kind heart. He thought about the crooked, smiley face. He realized that while he was often called a hero in movies, real heroism was what that girl had done tonight. It took courage to be kind to a stranger. It took strength to see someone's pain and try to heal it with a few scribbled words. He passed a shop window and caught his reflection. For the first time in a long time, he didn't just see the exhaustion. He saw the light the waitress had told him to save. He saw a person worthy of a kind note. He straightened his back and walked on, the rain washing the city streets clean, leaving behind a world that felt just a little bit brighter, a little bit warmer, and a little less lonely than it had been before. The night had changed, and in some small, wonderful way, he had changed with it.